Anat, you're
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the few-minute delay, but on behalf of the Spice Committee, I'd like to welcome everybody and our guest speaker today. Also want to remind you in the temple listing that came out today and the one that you received the other day is our program that's coming up for January through March. So take a look at it and make sure you put down the dates for great programming again. And thanks to Nancy and the programming committee. And in case we don't get a chance to talk to you before then, wish everybody a very, very healthy and happy new year, and wish everybody the best. And with that, I'd like to introduce Nancy to go ahead and introduce our speaker.
all right. Anat, I think you're muted, are you?
I'm muted because you're speaking now.
Oh, all right. Well, you can unmute. All right. Welcome, Anat. Anat is an Israeli born in Jerusalem and serves as the executive director of the Israeli Religious Action Center. Is that pronounced Iras or Iraq?
Tragically, Iraq.
All right. That's why I asked. All right. Since 2002, her position at Iraq places her at the forefront of the effort to advance religious pluralism in the state of Israel. As executive director, Anat has fought and won recognition of reform and conservative conversions by the state and led the struggle against gender segregation in the public domain, including on public buses, airplanes, and a national radio station. In this webinar, Mrs. Anat Hoffman will present an historical overview of Israeli diaspora relations, where things currently stand, and challenges and opportunities for the future. Thank you. Welcome, Anat.
So shalom, everybody. I'm very impressed with you, with your group. I understand that you meet regularly in synagogue, and you are a special group that in other places, a group that stays home. So I admire you for knowing what's important, that it's important to get out of the house, meet people, learn new things, be challenged, and then come home for a cup of hot chicken soup. Special regards to Robert Weiss. Robert, before I married Dr. Hoffman, I was Anat Weiss, just like that, W-A-I-S-S. And my grandparents came from, the Weiss came from Hungary. Most Weisses come from there. No, not you? In 1903, they came from Hungary to the United States.
No, my families were both from the, depending on what day it was, whether it was Russia or Poland.
Russia or Poland, okay.
We
But at
welcome
least-
all Weisses, though.
I see you as family, Robert. You can't.
Welcome to the family.
Shalom. I will say some outrageous statements that I have heard before. I'm most interested in having a dialogue with you, hearing what you think about Israel, particularly what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Israel. I'm very, very curious. But first, I want to ask my colleague, Tal Kfir Shul, if you could please show a short video to the music of I Can't Keep Quiet, which shows you what happens when a woman in Israel wants to bring a Torah scroll to the Western Wall so she could read from the Torah. Remember the Jewish state? The only Jewish state on the planet where Jews are supposed to feel religious freedom? Well, look what happens when the video starts with Linda waking up, taking her talis, and attempting to go to the wall with the talit.
Sorry, it will take a second.
Put on
I'm
your
trying to
face.
figure out how to get to the damn thing.
Know your
Most of the
place. Shut up and smile. I could do that. 'Cause no one knows me, no one ever will. If I don't say something, take that dry blue pill. They may see a monster, they may run away, but I have to do this. I can't keep quiet. No, no, oh, I can't keep quiet. No, no, no one woman riot. Oh, I can't keep quiet. There'll be someone who understands. Must be someone who understands. There'll be someone who understands. Oh, I can't keep quiet. Oh, I can't keep quiet. I can't keep quiet. No, I won't keep quiet.
Yeah. So as you can see, despite the fact that this is the Jewish state and that the plan, at least the plan of the founders of the state were that this will be a place where Jews could experience Judaism to its utmost. This will be a country where the Club Med of the Jewish soul, the Disneyland of the Jews. This will be a place where all the Jewish expressions will be welcome. Well, reading Torah at the Western Wall today for women is a felony, punishable by 6 months imprisonment. The reason it's the regulation, it's called the 13th regulation of the Law of Holy Places. There's the Law of Holy Places that says you shouldn't piss at the wall, you shouldn't spit on the wall, you shouldn't have graffiti on the wall, you shouldn't smoke on Shabbat at the wall, you shouldn't beg at the wall. Those of you who visited the wall, you know that there are some professional beggars there. But the 13th regulation from 1993 states that no one can perform a religious act contrary to local custom, which offends the feelings of others. And if you do such an act, you are punished by 6 months imprisonment. Well, for a woman to read Torah at the Western Wall, at the women's section, is a religious act. It's contrary to local custom, and it offends the feelings of others, and it's punishable. And this is a good example to illustrate to you that somewhere we missed the mark in Israel when it comes to religion. We are phenomenal in so many other ways. Israel should make you very proud in looking at some of the Israeli creations, both in technology, in agriculture, in music, and in poetry, and in prose. Israelis are phenomenal. Maybe I should mention that 9 Israelis won the Nobel Prize, and that's more than Nobel Prize winners from India. And those who don't know, India is bigger, a lot bigger. So Israel should make us proud in so many ways, except one. When it comes to what are the Jewish values of the Jewish state, there is a great chiasm. Am I saying it correctly? Chiasm. There's a great rift between what Israelis see as Jewish values and what you see as Jewish values. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Do you have a right or even a duty to voice what you think are Jewish values? Now, if anyone strays from what is seen as the national religion of Israel, which is orthodoxy, that person suffers violence, meaning the religious Orthodox monopoly in Israel it does not shy away from using violence. And I'd like to ask you, Tal, to show us another video, shorter even. And in that video, you'll see what happened to us just a few months ago in June, on the 11th of June, on the new month of Tammuz, when we came to the wall with our prayer books in order to read and pray from them.
Hi, I'm Tammy Gottlieb, Vice Chair of Women of the Wall. I've been coming to the Western Wall to pray with Women of the Wall for almost 13 years. I cry there very few times. Most of the time, I don't let the evil get to me. But on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, it was just too difficult. A bunch of incited boys, without an ounce of respect, grabbed a suitcase full of our prayer books and tore them to shreds. They stepped on the pages and on my hands. They tore the pages and threw them in my face because of their religious radicalism. I saved what I could, and with a broken suitcase in my arms, I went into the women's section. Once there, surrounded by my friends, I cried. The powerful prayer service we had after this horrible event proved that what we were doing is so important. All the horrible feelings disappeared when I caught a glimpse of one of the young girls that came to pray with us. Especially now, I ask you to join Women of the Wall, stand by our side, and be part of our struggle. Support us.
So this is hard to hear and hard to see. Jews are tearing women's prayer books at the wall because while they were tearing, they were shouting, Sifrei minim, Sifrei minim. Sifrei means books. Minim means those who are not Jewish. Even though our prayer book, our Siddur, is exactly the Orthodox Siddur you can find in any synagogue. It was torn to shreds. We are demonized because we pray a little different from everybody else. And what makes our prayer a little different? We are women who put on a prayer shawl. Whoa. We are women who pray out loud. We are women who put on phylacteries, and we are women who read from the Torah. These 4 acts are done in every synagogue in diaspora regularly by women. It is not a rare thing. Many in the Jewish world, maybe I remind you that the Reform movement alone in North America is larger than the conservative and the Orthodox combined. It is a regular practice for women to put on a tallis and for women to pray out loud. And the fact that in Israel, we are subject to such violence and that the police is doing so little to help is very disturbing. And I'd like to put to you, I know you live far away in Charlotte, and I know that you are not in the age group that can, I don't know, get on a plane and come here and have a fist fight. But I'd like you to consider, what would you do in your synagogue if there is bloodshed at the wall in the next new month when Women of the Wall come to pray? What will you do? Now you may say, what can I do? Do I have a right to say something? After all, I don't send my children to the army in Israel. I don't pay taxes in Israel. By what right can I intervene in what's happening in Israel? Well, I'd like to say that you have an honorary place at the table when we discuss what are the Jewish values of the Jewish state. Because the Jewish state is the most important historic development of our lifetime. I can make a case for that. It's unique and rare. For the first time in millennia, the world has given the Jews a chance to have a sovereign state of their own. By what right can Israelis say to you that you don't have a place at the table? Has nothing to do whether you pay taxes here, or whether you donate here, or whether you send your children to the army here, or anything else. You know that when we have a war, or when we have a fire, or when we have trouble, we run over to Charlotte, hat in hand, and we ask you to support Israel, right? Raise your hand if you were asked to support Israel after some catastrophe. Of course you were. So I'm going to ask you, why not look at what's happening in Israeli Judaism as a catastrophe? It reflects on you and it affects you. For example, there's now a problem with converts in Israel. Instead of embracing Jews by choice, Israel is making problems for Jews by choice. I can tell you of 2 cases that we're now representing in court. One is a Hungarian Jew who made Aliyah from Hungary. His Hungarian is perfect, but his Hebrew not so much, and his English is terrible. So he was summoned to the Ministry of Interior, and he was asked, in order to check that his conversion is kosher, what do you hear when you go to synagogue on Yom Kippur? And he said, I go to synagogue and I eagerly listen for the trumpet. Oh, that can't be a real Jew, says the Ministry of Interior, and issued a deportation letter. Ladies and gentlemen, when he said trumpet, he translated from Hungarian the word for instrument of wind. That's what he was translating. And to annul somebody's conversion because of a mistake in translation is so cruel and so, it makes me crazy angry. Another case is of a widow that her husband died this month, in the end of November. She was summoned to the Ministry of Interior and she was asked when was the last time she visited her husband's grave. She said 10 days ago, and they asked her to recite the Kaddish. My friends, she is a convert. Her parents are not Jewish. She did not say Kaddish over her parents. This is the first time a Jew has died in her family. She knows how to read the Kaddish in transliteration. She doesn't know it by heart. She had a meltdown at the office of the Ministry of Interior, a meltdown. feeling so beaten and so much self-loathing that she doesn't know how to say the Kaddish by heart. So I am appalled by what's happening in the name of Judaism in Israel. And I'll say one more outrageous thing, and then I'll open it to your wonderful comments and questions. There is a minority of Israeli rabbis who are racist. 59 out of 2,000 state-paid rabbis. It is a minority. The tragic thing is that the other rabbis do not criticize those racist rabbis. And the racist rabbis preach that non-Jews are not really human. The question arises, one of them asks why do Arabs have 2 legs? Since they are donkeys, they should have 4 legs. They have 2 legs so they can clean and build for us. You know that in our jail sits for life Mr. Yigal Amir, an Orthodox Jew who murdered our prime minister on the 4th of November, 1995. This is a man who observes all the mitzvot, all the 613 mitzvot, well, 612. The one about not murdering, he does not observe. And this man changed the course of history in Israel. And he didn't do it without rabbis telling him that it's all right to murder the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. So I am extremely worried that there is a whole movement in Israel, Hu Yigal Otanu, he will redeem us, demanding his release. I'm amazed that over 30 women wish to marry him in jail. One of them actually did. He's got 3 children in jail already. And this is a person who is completely devoted to Judaism, who murdered the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense of Israel. I am very disturbed by the fact that zealot Judaism is not under control and that it can bring to bloodshed. Now, some rabbis don't let me speak to their congregation. They say that you would love Israel more if you knew about it less. Because I'm sure that so far I've told you some things that are very disturbing that you didn't know. But my friends, this is many years of marriage speaking. I believe that love is what remains after we know the truth. Robert here knows the truth about his wife, and he still loves her. That's a big deal. And you know the truth about him, and you still love him. That is wonderful. And I believe that if you know the truth about Israel, you will help Israelis like me to change this reality. If there was another Jewish state, my friends, I'd be on the first plane going there. But since there isn't, we must mend this one. And this one is worth mending. It is a marvelous achievement of the Jewish people. We screwed up in one place. We've given Orthodoxy full monopoly over all religion in Israel. That was a mistake. What Orthodoxy needs now is a good, healthy kick in the ass, real healthy competition. May the best rabbi win. May the best congregation grow. And it is impossible to accept that only Orthodoxy reigns in Israel. These were my comments, and now I'm dying to read your questions and hear your comments. And Nancy here is going to moderate, right? Nancy, you're going to find out who's raising her hand. And if you start speaking without unmuting, make my day. I love saying, particularly to women, unmute yourself.
Of a certain age.
All right, I'm looking in the box first. Let's see. All right.
No, put it on gallery.
That's what I'm trying.
Okay, well, here's an interesting one. How can the Orthodox men destroy prayer books? That is sacrilege. Do you have any more comment on that?
No, I don't know how they can do it. I
I
don't
know.
understand. Just like I don't understand Yigal Amil. I don't understand how you can be an observant Jew and murder the Prime Minister of Israel. And I don't understand how you can be an observant Jew and tear a prayer book of another Jew. However, what I don't understand at the wall is that there were hundreds of guards, ushers, police right there. This is one of the most guarded places in the Middle East, not just in Israel. How come no one was charged with this? There was a whole mob. You saw them, didn't you see? You
Yes.
saw these kids tearing us. Couldn't one of them be detained? Not one. All of them had to be schlepped to the police station and charged.
If we don't send our children into the Israeli army, neither do the Israeli Orthodox. So
Who said that? Very clever comment.
yes,
And not only the
our-
Orthodox,
our
not only
former, yeah, go ahead, please.
our former what?
Our former committee chair, Bob Wolf.
So Bob, this is an excellent comment. It's not just the ultra-Orthodox that don't send their children to the army, their boys, also the Arabs, minority in Israel, don't send their children to the army. And many secular Israelis are not sending their children to the army. The percentage of the eligible 18 years old that are supposed to be, we have mandatory conscription to the army. So 100% of the 18-year-olds should have been in the army. The numbers for 2020 were that 49% went, meaning that more than half the Israelis do not send their children to the army. The numbers for 2021 seem to be 46%, meaning that the number of eligible 18-year-olds that go to the army is shrinking, is becoming smaller. So half the Israelis don't send their children to the army. Quit telling yourselves that because you don't send your children to the army, you don't have a voice and what happens in Israel.
That's all in the chat. Sandy, did you have a comment? Sandy, did you have a comment? You're muted. Sandy.
Leon has a comment.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was wondering how they have a choice.
And
Of
they
whether-
don't have no, it's not a choice. What happens is people who are exempt from the army
Yeah,
have to qualify to an exemption, a physical exemption or a mental exemption, and
Right.
very, very few conscientious subjectors.
right.
And most of the kids the secular kids who are not in the army have a mental problem or a physical problem that prevents them from being soldiers.
But what about the ultra-Orthodox?
They are prevented because they are supposed to devote their lives to Torah from the very beginning. From age 3, they go to school where they are not taught core curriculum. What is the core curriculum of Israel? Math, science,
Yeah.
English, civics, life skills. They don't learn any of that. They are basically unemployable adults.
All right.
Nancy Leon has his hand up.
Yes, I didn't see that. Just go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Leon.
Okay,
Yes.
just to remind some people here, in 2011, we brought over Spice, 37 seniors came to Israel. And on one of our visits, we were greeted by Rabbi Miri Gold. Anat Hoffman, I know you represented Miri Gold in our
Yes.
case for Reform rabbis, women rabbis. Isn't that continuing to go on in terms of reform achievements in Israel? And what's happening? What's the status?
First, Leon should move to the head of the class. Thank you for remembering this. One correction, we represented the Miri Gold not as a woman rabbi, but as the first Reform rabbi to receive a salary from the state of Israel.
Yep.
But let me qualify the case.
Mhm.
What we did is we convened her whole kibbutz Gezer. We asked all 98 members who is your rabbi? I'm actually on video asking them all, who is your rabbi? And they all voted unanimously that Miri Gold, born in Detroit, graduate of the Hebrew Union College, is their rabbi. Let me just say, Leon, at that very moment, they could have chosen their vet. They could have chosen anybody and say, this is our rabbi. Then we went to the regional council of Gezer, where there are 63 small villages. One of them is the kibbutz. And we asked the council, do you believe that Gezer has the right to choose autonomously their own rabbi? And we got an 80% vote. Yeah, the kibbutz can choose anywhere they want. We went to court representing the kibbutz and the regional council. Leon, notice we did not represent the Hebrew Union College. We did not represent Miri Gold, and we did not represent the reform movement. We represented the kibbutz and the regional council, and we won. We won in court. This was our strategy to win. And since the Miri Gold precedent, which is called in Israel, the gold precedent, we get over 2 million shekel a year for rabbis and regional councils in Israel. Now we are involved with trying to have neighborhood rabbis recognized. May I mention that in every neighborhood in Israel, there is a state-paid rabbi. In some neighborhoods, there are more. How do I know? Because when they burnt down the conservative synagogue in Ramot Eshkol, I called and I found that I called the rabbi of the neighborhood in order to have them denounce this act. And I found that there are 16 state-paid rabbis in Ramot Eshkol. So we are now fighting to have a reform and conservative rabbi in a neighborhood. It is not going very well, Leon, if you're asking me. No, not going very well. We hope with the new government that we be able to move it forward. Do you have a role in it? Absolutely. Look, there are 2 million Reform Jews in America. If 100,000 of them, or 250,000 of them, wrote a letter to Netanyahu, to Mr. Bennett, our prime minister, a letter to the prime minister saying, Asher is my rabbi. He's a graduate of the Hebrew Union College. He is navigating my Jewish life. Because of him, I went on a spice trip to Israel. I demand you recognize him as a rabbi in the state of Israel. If we had 250,000 such letters at the prime minister's office, ladies and gentlemen, we could do some headway.
All right, thank you. Mort Kaplan, Rabbi Mort has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering what ultimately happened with the two people you told about.
They are in court right now. My heart bleeds for both of them. It looks good for the Hungarian. We were able to show 10 different translations for the word trumpet in Hungarian. We was a professor of the Hungarian language from the Hebrew University, and we're showing that he used a general term for an instrument that you blow through. He didn't know the word shofar. With the widow, we are at a loss right now. We are going to, first because she had this meltdown, our lawyers are not trained what to do when the client becomes a puddle on the floor. Look, widowhood is one of the worst, if not the worst life event that we go through. She's just been widowed. It's not even shloshim. And she was asked to recite it by heart. Somehow the whole world crashed. We are at a loss with her. If you want, sign up to our newsletter. I'm going to ask Tal here to put in my newsletter. I will certainly write a newsletter about this woman as this case unfolds. And thank you for caring, Mort. What a rabbi, huh? He asks about the people.
Toda Rabba.
Leon, did you have your hand up?
Unmute yourself, Leon.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I wanted to come back a bit. In America, when we look at the voting bloc, we have more women voting than men. Is that the case in Israel?
I don't know.
Well,
I don't know. Sorry.
I understand your message about abroad getting letters signed and making the case for Reform women rabbis. What's happening in Israel in terms of the women in Israel? What are they doing? How are they being organized? Are they grassroots?
Lian, you're making a mistake that many of us make, that we think that women will vote for women, women will vote for women's issues. But if you look at the ladies that voted for Mr. Trump versus the women that voted for Hillary, you realize that there are other considerations, particularly in Israel, that sway the vote. Your gender is not the most important consideration. And many Israeli women vote because of other reasons for parties that continue the discrimination of women. But there are some signs of hope. For example, in this last election, there was a group of ultra-Orthodox women called Lo nivcharot, lo bocharot. If we're not elected, we don't vote. Ultra-Orthodox women. You thought that they are as docile and passive as a doormat. Think again. They formed that party that says, if we don't get elected, we don't vote for you. I think they're very close to deciding to run as their own platform. And let me tell you, not only Orthodox women, but also secular women will vote for that party because it shows so much gumption, so much power, so much courage for ultra-Orthodox women to say enough is enough. All three ultra-Orthodox parties in the government, in the Knesset, they're in the opposition, yes? All three parties, Shas, Agudat Yisrael, and Degel HaTorah, all three have no women there at all. They are not allowed to even compete. So ultra-Orthodox women are changing ultra-Orthodoxy. I think the bravest feminists I know in Israel today are Orthodox women challenging this routine.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Sam Zimmerman has a comment. What question? What is the status of the proposed political deal to create an egalitarian prayer space at the wall?
Woo! Okay, Sam too,
Wow.
move to the head of the class. Very important question. Well, right now, this is on top of the agenda. That's why I showed you the two little videos about the wall. The wall is now really #1 issue of religion and state on the agenda of the new government. They are afraid to implement the solution that you alluded to. The solution is that there'll be two plazas right next to each other. One will be an Orthodox plaza like the one you know today, with a big partition, with ushers that make sure that you are dressed modestly if you're a woman, with ushers that turn a blind eye if you are tearing the prayer book of somebody else, completely run by the ultra-Orthodox. And right next to it, there will be another plaza run by the Reform, the Conservative, and Women of the Wall. And there'll be no partition there. And we will allow a blind person to come with a dog. And we will allow a deaf child to have a bar mitzvah. And we will hand out talesim to women who wish to wear them. And we will be nice. And we will not impose a dress code, and we will not make the Pope take off his crucifix if he comes to visit. We will act nice, and we will compete on the hearts of the 12 million visitors to Israel, to the wall every year. And I think most visitors will come to our plaza, because in the competition, we will win. Most people don't want to be harassed the way they are now at the ultra-Orthodox section. So the ultra-Orthodox are threatening to burn Israel, to burn, they're using the word to burn, if this is implemented. And Mr. Bennett, our prime minister, is deliberating. They are exerting enormous amounts of pressure on him. And what do I want? I want counter pressure. I want Charlotte to say, we want the wall agreement now. I want 100,000 letters from North American Jews to Mr. Bennett telling him, it's time you recognized our sort of Judaism. It's time Israel recognized that there's more than one way to be Jewish. It's time the wall was a place I felt welcome. That's what I need.
I have another comment. This is from Stefan Pinckney. There are photographs from around the 1800s that show both men and women praying at the wall without a
Partition.
yes. Why was it okay then, but not now?
Look, if I was a demagogue, I would say, oh, Stephen, you're right, Stefan, this is how it was. The Jews loved it then. Why don't they love it now? But the truth is that there is a very large body of historical evidence. The Jews wanted to build a partition at the wall throughout the 1800s and the 1900s. It's the British mandate that forbade them from building anything because of the Muslims who felt that if the Jews start building at the wall, they are going to take over the Temple Mount. So despite the fact, you see photos of men and women together, but the Jews constantly demanded from the, first from the Ottomans, the Turks, and then from the British, the right to build a partition. The partition was erected on the, in fact, your synagogue should be very aware of it, was erected on the 14th of April, 1968. I'm reminding you that the war happened in June of 67. So it took a few months for the government of Israel to push itself to build a partition. And what brought this partition about is that Rabbi Schindler came to Israel with a whole plane load of Reform Jews. And because Rabbi Schindler was going to hold a prayer of men and women together, our government almost fell. The coalition government almost fell. The rabbis demanded that when the American comes, we must have a partition. The archaeologists said, this is a holy site, a national monument, no partition allowed. And since Eshkol, the Prime Minister Eshkol, wanted to continue to be Prime Minister, he capitulated to the rabbis. He gave them full authority over it. They built the partition, and when Rabbi Schindler arrived in Israel, the partition was there.
Wow.
But thank you, Stefan, for this good comment. Altogether, I must tell you, this is not my first Zoom call, but the level of your comments and your questions is very, very high. I'm having fun.
Good.
Just so you know.
Here's another question, and this one is from Emmy Miller.
Why can't she talk? Wait a minute, Emmy, why don't you talk?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself and talk.
So
go ahead.
First of all, Anat, I have to thank you again and again from the very bottom of my heart. The work you're doing is so phenomenal. You keep it up, even with all of the negativity and all of the things that must be coming your way. You have no idea of the goodwill and our good thoughts. If there was a way for me to be there, I would go there in a minute. So that's the first thing. And secondly, I'm in another class with a rabbi, ongoing class, and he told us just last night that Israel is offering passports to Jewish people in case, especially in the United States, in case there's a difficulty at any time, that they can just go. They don't have to give up their own passport or their citizenship, but they were offering these passports. So I thought, did you hear about this? And I wanted to share that information.
I mean, this is Israel's immigration policy from the day it was born. One of the first laws Israel passed is the law of return. And the law of return ensures that every person born of a Jewish mother or has converted and is not a member of another religion can become an Israeli citizen without giving up their other citizenship. So it's not that Israel is offering, this has been on the table since the inception of the state. So there's no news there.
His point was that if there was a time coming when American passports, people holding them, were not able to leave the country for whatever reason, that with the Israeli passport in their hand, they could do so if they wanted to.
Yeah.
That was the thrust.
Yeah, that's no change from, they're shlichim, you know, they're emissaries of the Israeli government all over the United States, maybe not in North Carolina, but in other states. And they issue, if you qualify and you say you want to make aliyah, that is immigrate to Israel, they will enable it. This was the point of the Jewish state, to be a haven and a place where we all feel at home. You too have to feel at home. And yes, and for that, we need to change some of our policies. Emmy, and just to rest assured, not only am I enjoying my job, I'm getting a salary for it. You can't beat that. I'm doing what I like and I actually get paid for it.
All right, Sandy, go ahead.
When you were speaking about Aliyah, Anat, it reminded me that I made Aliyah in 1972, and there were so many people making Aliyah that the ulpans were filled. I was wondering, in light of what's happening in Israel now, what is the level of American and Canadian Jews making Aliyah?
So so happens I do know that information. So the number of immigrants to Israel is certainly shrunk during these last 2 years. But I want to share with you a study that I read about staying in Israel. Sandy, obviously you didn't stay in Israel.
Well, we lived through
how many years after you came, how many years afterwards did you leave? Was it 5 to 10 years?
No, we lived 2.5 years. We lived through the Yom Kippurim
Yom
War.
Kippurim War, and then you left.
Yeah.
Okay, so
That,
this study looked at people who come to Israel and left Israel after 5 to 10 years. So they looked at people from France and Argentina and other countries that made Aliyah to Israel, and they found that 25% left after 5 to 10 years for one of 3 reasons. One, difficulty with the Hebrew language. 2, security considerations. 3, economic problems. However, looking at the North American olim, the new immigrants from North America, the finding is very dramatically different. 68% left between 5 to 10 years. That's almost 3 times larger than the numbers for other countries. And the reason is not one of the 3 reasons I just mentioned, but something completely different. The drudgery of everyday life, namely the Israelis.
Yeah.
Those American Jews who left Israel after making Aliyah felt disappointed because every day they were called, it's a derogatory name in Israel, Freier. Freier comes from the Yiddish, from the German, and it means sucker. And Sandy here resonates with it because she was called Freier. Why? Who makes Aliyah from America?
Yeah.
Why would you make Aliyah from America? So one of the in-depth interviews in the study was a photographer from San Francisco. She made Aliyah to Israel. Oh, maybe you should know, San Francisco is considered the most coveted place for Israelis in North America. She made Aliyah from San Francisco, and she asked one of her Israeli friends, how can she works full-time as a photographer during the day, but sometimes she moonlights in a bar mitzvah or a wedding. And she wanted to know how to inform the Israeli IRS about this income that she makes during the evening. And she was called Freierit. Crazy. Ask me how to avoid telling the IRS, but to tell them, coming from San Francisco, and she also wants to pay taxes. She was made fun of so often that she's had enough. Let me just say one addendum to it. When these people were asked, when were the most meaningful years of your life? Those people who left Israel 5 to 10 years after making Aliyah said that those years in Israel were the most meaningful years of their life.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a lot of hands up now. I'm
Good.
going to
Good.
go to Donna and then Sarah and Sam and then
Nancy,
Yes.
Nancy, Ron Liss has had his hand up from the beginning.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Okay, Ron, go ahead. Ron?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
one of our sons made Aliyah to Israel 4 years ago, and he lives in Jerusalem. And he recently came back for his sister's wedding, and we had a long talk, and he said, Israel is my home, and that's the place for me. And many, many years ago, our daughter, who is a rabbi, Rabbi Janet Liss, was
I know her.
in Jerusalem, and she called us one day and she said, turn on CNN, you're going to see me on CNN. And I said, what for? She said, just turn on the TV. And we turned it on, and there was Janet at the wall praying, and she started a riot. And CNN was covering the riot that she started.
Yeah, good. She makes good trouble. And is she still in Israel?
No, she's in Glen Cove, Long Island. She has a congregation there.
So we should ask her why in the end.
Okay,
She's left her meaningful years here.
Right, Donna.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm enjoying this very much. I visited Israel twice in 95 and 2006. And I remember learning, I think on my first trip, that because the Orthodox control everything, if you want to get married and you don't want an Orthodox wedding, people would leave the country to get married. So do most people do that? Is there a percentage of people that get married in Israel or those that leave? And I remember being told they go to Cyprus. I don't know if that's the only place, but I've always been curious about that.
So there's only one way to get married in Israel, and that's Orthodox. And worse, there's only one way to get divorced, and that's Orthodox. 25% of the couples go to Cyprus and other places. I wrote a book actually a few years ago called 50 Ways to Wed Your Lover, about how to get married in other places. And so the majority of Israelis marry in Orthodox the way everybody does. But 32% of Israelis get divorced. In fact, this number is now higher because of the corona. Up to 36% of Israelis are getting divorced. And even those who got married in Cyprus have to get the divorce here in the Rabbanut. It doesn't solve that problem. We need to have freedom of choice in marriage and divorce. We need to have civil marriage, reform marriage, conservative marriage, and even better, reform divorce, conservative divorce, and civil divorce. The fact that we don't have it is a big, big problem. However, we have wonderful common law laws, and many Israelis choose not to get married at all, or to be married by someone who is not recognized by the state. And anybody who's graduated the Hebrew Union College is not recognized as a rabbi by the state of Israel, because the Hebrew Union College is not recognized as an institution of Jewish learning. Donna, you should be very upset with that, because that means that everybody, any reform or conservative rabbi on the planet is not recognized in Israel as a rabbi. How do you put up with it? This is so wrong. It's chutzpah, enormous chutzpah. So Israelis find other ways to get married. And as I said, many of them just are not. Today, I got a call, a WhatsApp from Oded Feller, and he says, after 15 years and our son Barak, 8 years old, Reut and I decided to get married. So they were common law for all these years. My own sister was a mother of 4 children. She's not married to Alon. They're common law. And the rights that they have as common law are exactly those as married.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Friedman, go ahead. Sarah?
Yes, I had unmute. You talked about the people who made Aliyah that left Israel. What is the reason for so many Israelis leaving Israel?
What a wonderful question. In studies, many Israelis leave Israel because of the issues of religion and state. They've had it with religious coercion. It's true that they don't flock to your synagogue. The hardest Jews to bring to synagogue are Israelis. And the percentage of assimilation among Israelis in North America doubles that of regular Jews. Now, let me tell you for a minute, there is assimilation in our community in North America. Double that, and you get to what the Israelis are. And why are the Israelis assimilating in a double speed? Because they are not inoculated at all. They are not, they think that in their arrogance, and I know that personally, because when I was in America, I was as arrogant. I thought, you guys, you need to go to synagogue because you have this lame problem with your Jewish identity, but I'm an Israeli. I'm Ari Ben Knan. I'm the new Jew. I don't need to go to synagogue. I'll do Israeli things. It took me a while to learn that there are very few Israeli things to do. And that actually Judaism provides me with the community and with the values and with the learning that I need. I had to travel to Los Angeles to learn that. I didn't learn that in Israel.
Thank you. Sam, go ahead.
Thanks. Do you see that the politics changing so that your what you desire about more access to the wall and other increased or say decreased power of the Orthodox? Because there's a Reform rabbi in the Knesset, and we're told the number of progressive Jews is growing. Is it possible that rather than 250,000 letters from America changing things, that Israelis will change it from the inside?
It's certainly the hope that Israelis will change it from the inside. But the fact that, yes, the number of Israelis who say, I would rather have a Reform conservative rabbi in my life is growing. It's now at 11%, which is about 1 million Israelis. 1 million Israelis say, I would rather have Reform and conservative. However, that doesn't change their voting. That doesn't change when they go to the voting booth, they have other things in mind. It's going to take a while before Israelis take hold of their destiny here in Judaism. And part of the problem is, you know, I spoke this morning at a high school. I had 2 presentations in a high school. If there's something that upsets me about the ultra-Orthodox is that they denied young Israelis to even dream that things could be different. One question I was asked at the high school was, what's the difference between a normal rabbi and a Reform rabbi? A normal rabbi and a Reform rabbi. And another question was, so basically what you do is you fight against Judaism. You fight against Judaism. These kids really can't imagine what you guys see as trivial. They can't imagine a synagogue where men and women sit together. They can't imagine a woman with a guitar doing a Kabbalat Shabbat, wearing a talit and leading services. They've not seen it. So the ignorance of Israelis is astounding. Ask the nearest Israeli near you. Ask the first, raise your hand if you know, if you're doing business or you know an acquaintance, an Israeli in Charlotte. Raise your hand if you know an Israeli. Well, ask them the most trivial Jewish question and you'll be surprised. Many of you think that the fact that someone says chet and resh correctly and reads Hebrew on site makes them a super Jew. Let me tell you, there are 1.4 million Israeli Arabs who speak Hebrew better than many of your rabbis. They're not Jewish. To speak Hebrew perfectly does not a Jew make. And when you ask an Israeli, an adult Israeli, about Shavuot, and you say to him, what do you do on Shavuot? An adult will tell you, I eat cheese. Jews for cheeses. Yeah, but when you ask him, what is the meaning of the holiday? Who gave you the Torah? What is your Torah? Nothing. The answer, I eat cheese, comes from kindergarten. That was the last time he learned anything Jewish in school, was in kindergarten. So I am appalled by the fact that so many Israelis don't know much about their Judaism, and many of them hate the stuff. They don't want to go to synagogue. They don't want to be affiliated with Judaism. They go to Los Angeles and they assimilate.
Rabbi Moore.
Yeah, hi. I just two things. One is that we ought never forget that Israel is one of the great success stories of the last century, in the world success story. Yeah. The other thing is that as far as Americans leaving Israel, my parents went to Israel in 1971, and they stayed. In fact, both of them are buried there in the cemetery near Beit Shemesh. One other question. My niece was married by a Sohar rabbi. He did a nice job. I wondered if you comment about that possibility.
So Sohar is a little bit of the fist in the velvet glove. They do a nice ceremony, but it is still an Orthodox ceremony, and your niece is going to have to go through divorce court, which is hostile to women. There are 10,000 women in Israel who are mesoravot get, who are not able to receive a get from their husband, and therefore they cannot continue their lives. He can continue. He can have 10 children from 10 other women. None of them will be considered bastards. But these women cannot have a relationship outside the marriage and he is refusing to give them a get. And the idea in the rabbinic court is that only a man can give a get to a woman. If he doesn't give her, too bad. And he says to her, I'll give you the get if you give me the apartment. I'll give you the get if you give me the car. I'll give you a get if you give me sole custody of the children. And 10,000 women are stuck. It's a very bad system, the rabbinic court. And if you were visiting Israel today, I would take you there, and you will see how women, the strange women you don't know, will immediately identify the men in our group and ask them to testify who they are. Why? Because they make a mistake. They go to the divorce court with their best friend, and their best friend is a woman, and a woman cannot testify in the rabbinic court. So if they see Mort here, they will say, Mort, they'll say, sir, would you be willing to go upstairs and testify who I am? And there he is standing in front of the rabbi and telling, her name is Bracha, her father's name is Shaul, he doesn't know her. Her friend who knows her nickname from kindergarten cannot testify. So the whole thing of marriage and divorce has to change. And to do that, to illustrate that, we did two events in the United States, and I invite you to look them up. Look up New York Times, 3 weddings and a statement. We convened thousands of Jews in Park Avenue Synagogue, in a synagogue in Park Avenue. Yes. We brought thousands to 3 weddings of Israelis, and you should listen, you should read the article about why these Israelis had to marry abroad, because they were not able to get married in Israel. It was a wonderful event. A Pulitzer Prize photographer took pictures of all our brides and grooms. We took over the wedding section of the New York Times. So look up 3 weddings and a statement, New York Times. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Surprise, surprise, I have another meeting. We'll discuss the strategy at the wall. I wanted to say that this was a pleasure. Your questions were wonderful. I feel at home. I want to go to Charlotte. Stay warm, stay safe. I love spice. You know what is the spice of life? Salt is the spice of life. Do you know why the $sign is an S with 2 lines in it? Because salt was the first currency.
Thank you so much, and thank you
Remember the
everybody for
salary?
joining us today, and we really appreciate it. And
Thank
we
you.
look forward to you joining us for our next program in the beginning of
Thank you.
January. Have a great
And
year.
please sign up to my newsletter.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
thank you.
Come back.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't know. Tracy, are we having Zoom rooms? You're muted.
Sorry, I'm going to put you in now, okay?
Thank you.
Oh, there aren't that many people left. You want to join on?
Yeah, might